Right?
I have one last question. I know I'm taking up some time, so, in hearing from the craft cooperative and in the other discussions, there's been a lot of talk about security requirements and whatnot. You know, like having to file a transportation plan with, I guess, with the police department or whatever, and taking a different route all the time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all state regulations, correct? Yes. So my question there is, does anyone have a sense of whether those state regulations were developed in some measure to be inhibitive, is that a word, to sort of inhibit the development of marijuana growth, or is it an actual response to issues and problems that have arisen in other areas that are allowing cannabis cultivation? Does anyone know the answer to that?
You have an answer.
So the Cannabis Control Commission, in formulating its regulations, certainly had the benefit of the fact that marijuana had been legalized and the industry rolled out in other states. They certainly looked at other states and what they had done and what some of the issues were in formulating those regulations. And in a lot of regards, the Massachusetts regulations are much more are stricter than what has been allowed in other states.
And is that because of what they've seen, or is it sort of a subtle attempt to make it more difficult? I mean, do we have reason to be concerned about crime levels, et cetera, has that been experienced elsewhere? Do we have any information on that?
I don't think I can really speak to that. Certainly the Cannabis Control Commission has put in place a set of very strict state licensing and regulations with respect to the commercial side of this industry, and are looking to exercise a significant amount of oversight as to how this industry is regulated on the state level.
Thank you. Now just lay it down on it if there's a ledge to offset. Thank you.
I'm Peter Roaches. I'm a taxpayer. I'm also a resident over here. I've been thinking about this for some time. And my perception is that there is a group of people, it's a very small group of people, who are basically petitioning this town for the right to grow marijuana commercially. But I think that this town has an obligation to the thousands of property owners who have made a substantial investment in living here and owning property here. I think these people are should be the main focus of our efforts to achieve fairness and a plausible marijuana cultivation enterprise. So I'm thinking about residential, and I really strongly object to the growing of marijuana in this town in residential areas. And personally, I'm thinking, if I were a property owner and I had someone enabled to grow marijuana abutting my property, a security fence is not a garden fence. It doesn't keep out rabbits, it keeps out people. It's usually chain link, and often with razor wire. Now, I'm not sure exactly what type of fence is necessary, but it is not 2-inch chicken wire. It is not an attractive thing to have looking out across your property line. And secondly, I'm hearing security lighting at night. So I was thinking, I'm imagining myself all of a sudden confronted with property lit up at night, surrounded by a substantial fence, and then there's the, forgive the prosaic use of the word smell, the stench that marijuana gives off when it's actually getting into the ripening stage. All of these are insults against any abutter who has a right to enjoy their property in the confidence that the town is not going to make motions or bylaws that are going to make to decrease the enjoyment of this property. And I think that is the main issue here. I think it's the residential proposal that is dangerous to the habitability and well-being of the people who live here. Not just a handful of people who want to profit from growing marijuana. I don't want to see the town stood on its head to enable a small group of people to make a profit. We don't do that for any other commercial enterprise in this town. I don't see why these people are so special. So I urge you to consider the potential of this bylaw to permanently alter the appearance of this town and the well-being of its inhabitants. I think that is critical. So far, I think what's been attended to are details. I think we need to look at the macro level. Thank you.
Could you just repeat the end of what you just said? We need to, because I couldn't hear the last sentence.
I think, from my perspective, there is a opportunity, if that's the right word, to alter the character and appearance of this town substantially and irrevocably for a very limited purpose for a group of people to make a profit. And I really consider that the needs and the rights of the thousands of property owners in this town outweigh that privilege. And I think that is the crux of this right now. As I said, my objection is to growing marijuana in residential areas where it can impact people who own property here and to their detriment. Thank you.
Daniel Holt, my family lives on Daisy Lane in South Truro. I think there's a basic conceptual difficulty around this bylaw, which is that it appears to be written to facilitate and the development of a new industry. And so it might seem that supporting the bylaw means supporting growing marijuana in Truro. It's really not that. It's Truro's opportunity to regulate an industry. The industry is, if there's no bylaw passed, then there will be no regulation and growers will be able to grow without any of the kinds of limits that are being discussed here. So although a lot of this seems as though it's sort of a pro-cultivator initiative, it's actually a regulatory initiative. And this is all about the limits that Truro, so it's a matter of thinking of it, just as these are the limits, not these are sort of the giveaways.
I'd just like to recognize a fact about Truro, which is that we are a residential community, but originally this was a farming community. And there are farms that still exist that have existed for many years. And what these farms exist in residential areas is a fact. So whether you think from the perspective of this is a residential town with some farms, or this is a farming town with residences now, it's a perspective concept. And I certainly don't want to harm residents. The objective is to do no harm and still have farms exist in Truro. And if you were a farmer, you know how difficult it is to survive growing things. Ready for you to come on?
Good evening. I'm Stephanie Ryan. I live at Holsbury Road, and I'm a voter. I appreciate you taking the time to hear our concerns this evening. I am a farmer who has lived in Truro for 30 years. As an organic farmer in the Outer Cape for over 20 years, I have watched as many of my peers have been priced out due to exorbitant land prices. Cape Cod has a rich history of small independent farms. In order to survive and pay my mortgage, I have a house cleaning business, a property management business, I'm a farmer in the school in both the Wellfleet and Truro elementary schools, I coordinate the Truro Agricultural Fair, and I am the project manager and lead farmer overseeing a USDA grant that facilitates programs at 7 elementary schools on the Outer Cape, reaching annually over 1,200 students. All of this is in addition to farming my land, providing not only open space and habitat for many threatened species, such as the monarch butterfly, but to produce produce, flowers, honey, herbs for our community and visitors alike at local farmers markets, restaurants, and institutions. My interest in adding cannabis as a member of the High Dune Craft Cooperative, also known as HDCC, to diversify my crop list is rooted in my desire to maintain my family farm, despite the ever-increasing cost of living in Truro. It will help us modestly increase our income while creating year-round jobs. The High Dune Craft Cooperative's bylaws reflect our commitment to inclusion as well as safe, organic growing practices. We will be striving to produce an environmentally conscious, high-quality product. Our farmers respect our aquifer and the land we farm. For decades, we have been growing organic produce, and those practices will carry over to this additional crop. Our co-op members have a long and diverse background of social activism. Through the CCC's leadership program, the members of HDCC will continue to work on behalf of social and economic justice in this industry. We are committed to achieving all 4 leadership levels, which include social justice leader, local employment leader, energy and environmental leader, and compliance leader. In addition, the HDCC has developed a co-op bylaw that requires us to donate a percentage of our co-op's annual income to organizations, research projects, or institutions with the express intent of funding continued research in the efficacy of medicinal benefits from cannabis. This is not a mandated requirement by the CCC, but was important for us as members to reflect our commitment to furthering the cause for medical cannabis. By supporting local, socially responsible cannabis businesses with a focus on community, you are supporting Truro's future and helping to maintain its rural integrity. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all for letting us speak and being here. Dave Dewitt, Dave Williams, Rollsbury Road, farming in Truro for 31 years. I have a degree in plant soil science. I also have the pleasure of growing in California. And that's what I'd like to speak on today, because Peter's numbers are a little not, it's apples and oranges, actually. The numbers that Peter brought up from his research, in using California as an example, is really apples and oranges. Our environment is 100% different than California's. Our humidity levels reduces the needs for a lot of our water. There's so many variables in growing cannabis as far as energy needs and water needs that to pinpoint it on one thing is almost impossible. The genetics for each plant specifically dictates how the plant needs to grow. A sativa variety, for instance, is a tropical variety. It needs a lot more water per day than a indica variety, which is born out of the mountains of the Afghanistan region, which needs a significantly smaller amount of water to use. The amount of space to grow a plant varies with every genetic difference of a plant. Like all plants, they all have a little bit of variable degrees of how much big or small they get, what yields they'll have. So to pinpoint yields for canopy or anything like that is really impossible to do. You can have averages, and that's fine and dandy, but Cape Cod is a tough environment to grow this crop, It's not going to be anywhere close to the numbers of California or Colorado or Oregon or Washington. We're far from those numbers due to our humidity levels and the lack of dry air. The indoor growing, the numbers that Peter is most likely looking at are from high-pressure sodium bulbs and halide lights. We will not be allowed to use those lights in growing in the state. The CCC is mandating that we use new, smarter technology, the LED technology, where the energy output or input is so much less. I mean, vastly different. They also went so far to restrict it to 36 square feet per kilowatt. So we're restricted to the amount of wattage that's going to be per space. So when you do the calculations, you'll find it's going to be significantly different than Peter's numbers came up with. LED technology is just vastly different than the numbers that he most likely got his from. The technology is changing every day in LED technology. The current thinking with LEDs is there's a massive reduction in yields. So by using the LED technology, our yields are going to go down. But we'll have to comply with the state, so we have no choice. The benefit for the neighborhood or whatever is that they have automatic shielding light that focuses the light downward, where the LED and where the halide bulbs and the high pressure sodium bulbs they cast light throughout the whole space. So it's completely going to be a different scenario than what, let's say, if you've driven by the Perrys at night and seen the tomatoes growing under their lights. It's much different than that. The look is going to be completely different. So I really urge you to take consideration for the discrepancies that the East Coast and the West Coast will have when it comes to water usages. You know, there are plenty of cannabis plants that can be grown with 2 to 3 gallons of water every 3 days. There's plenty of them out there. So the numbers are off, and I just want to let everyone know that. And then, you know, if you have any more questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I inform people where I got my numbers?
Sure.
Okay.
Where'd you get your numbers, Peter?
I got my numbers from an article written by somebody.
Can't hear you, Peter.
An article written by Brandy Keene, who is the co-founder and senior technical advisor of Cerna Inc., which makes and distributes water-efficient indoor cannabis cultivation equipment and also serves as a consultant to growers. And she is writing partially to defend the cannabis industry in California from the allegations that they're using all the water. And she says that these numbers that I gave you, we typically see watering ranges of somewhere between 3 and 5 gallons per day per kilowatt of light, not per plant, et cetera, et cetera. This is where her numbers come from. Furthermore, I know all about metal halide and high pressure and low pressure sodium, LEDs. It's not that big a deal. LEDs are a little bit more efficient. It's not that, it won't make that much of a difference.
Hello. You want to speak?
My name is Elaine Riley. I'm a taxpayer here in Apple Lane.
Can't hear you.
I can't hear you.
Okay, I'll try some better. My name is Elaine Riley. I live on Apple Lane. Thank you for pointing out that Truro is an agricultural town and has become a residential town. I think that's an important thing for us to remember as a context for all of this. And Steph, thank you for talking about how much work you do to live here year-round. And I have to say, as somebody who's a part-time person here, my friends who live here year-round work their bottoms off. And I see this as a way for people who I know who I buy the vegetables all summer and make a living here year-round, have a business, and be able to raise families here and be really lovely parts of our community. So I feel like we need the level of disrespect in some of the conversation about this I find really disturbing. And I feel like our neighbors are asking to find a way to make a good living year-round. And I feel like we should be supporting them in this. And I urge you to make sure this happens in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a public hearing, so if you do have an opinion or a question, this is a really appropriate time to come and talk to us. And I appreciate anybody's comments. Come on up.
I'm Andrew Smith. I appreciate all the hard work you've done already and the great deal you're going to have to do to get this right. My property is 600 feet from one of the proposed sites, I think, because it's not been clear exactly where these sites would be, but from what I can imagine, that's where it looks like. I'm worried about a number of things, but the latest worry is the smell. That's been brought up a couple of times. It's covered in here. I went on the internet. I tried to find out whether controlling the smell was possible outdoors as opposed to indoors. It appears that there's a good deal of equipment available to control it indoors. But I don't know about outdoors. And that worries me. And you're not dealing directly with indoor or outdoor. It's sort of vague. Maybe this or maybe that. I think we need to get very specific about that. And then I think the distance to other residential properties needs to be brought into consideration. Maybe 10,000 feet from a residential property if you plan to grow it in, outdoors or something like that. I have no idea exactly what makes sense, but you need to be, like they said, the devil is in the details. Well, I think you need to get into all of the details as deeply as you possibly can. This proposal is a little shocking. It's about, as I understand it, about 8 or 9 times as much canopy as the ad hoc committee's proposal, if I had that right. And it wasn't that five parcels or 5 locations of 5,000 each?
Yes.
25,000 compared to 200,000. Is that right?
Yes.
So this is much, much more. Does that mean that they need this much for it to be profitable to do it? Or is this being greedy? I don't know. I think it's a great idea to have this, if it's properly controlled as you're trying to do. I'm all in favor of it, but it scares me to death. Some of the potential loss of property values and the change of character of this town, and all those things, they're very real. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just had a couple questions. Where does the board stand on these? Does it a bullet point?
Can't hear you. The question is, where does the board stand? Oh yeah, could you introduce yourself again?
Correct. And some of them I think you've already incorporated.
No, I said, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, David Nesky, Rolling Hills, South Truro. But no, where does the board stand on these bullet points?
Where does the board stand on the bullet points? Okay. Well, like I said, the board has been trying to compromise with the cooperative and find a place where we can agree and for the town to be protected. And some of the work has been fruitful, and then sometimes we have come to the point where we have disagreed. Do you want to know about each specific item? I can try and go through that.
That's why we're
survey
here.
the board and find out what the board feels about each of these items. But most of the discussion for tonight is to hopefully hear from the public. This board will deliberate on this and provide a revised bylaw at the next meeting, but we have the proposal, and we have some of the items that the craft cooperative has asked for, so that you can see what the difference is right now. Where do I stand on cooperatives? If we had one cooperative in the town, that license would then be closed by this one cooperative. And there would be no other. We don't have another cooperative asking for a license, but this would mean that this particular group would be the only group left. And if you feel that that's fair, then I can agree with you. But if you think that it's fair that some other group might be able to come together and say, we have a better idea, we'd like to do it also. This town could say too, but I haven't made that decision in my mind. If any of the board wishes to speak on that right now, that's the first item up here, right?
Mr. Chairman, could we get a copy of these bullet points, because the board hasn't received them?
You can see them here, right?
Why don't I go through the rest of my questions?
Oh, sure.
Is it my understanding that if you need to get any of these, get a license, you have to get a special permit, and all the abutters have to be notified?
You gotta hold that microphone just like this, because I
No?
can't hear you.
Oh, on a special permit coming from, if it comes from the ZBA or the planning board, don't the abutters required to be notified of that and have say in it?
Yes.
Okay. The other item we haven't discussed at all is background checks of the potential people involved in the growing of the marijuana or the retail.
Like I said, the Cannabis Commission has a series of requirements. That is in their requirements.
Okay, so that's a state
So
issue.
that would be redundant. So like I said, this is not everything that the cooperative has to go through. But background checks are part of, or a Corey check or something like that.
FBI check.
Say that again? FBI check.
Okay. Another point is there seems to be some difference of opinion on what is needed for water, electricity, and everything else. Instead of debating it, why don't you just get a performance bond from the farmers? Like a construction company would do to make sure they perform according to the requirements they're going to say they're going to perform to.
Performance bond.
Yes,
Okay.
from an insurance company to make sure that the farmers, whatever the thing is, the town right now, if a contractor came in town and wanted to do some utility work on the street, are required to post a performance bond to the town to make sure the work has been done in accordance with whatever plans and specs have been presented. Why don't we have the same thing here?
Parts of their proposal would require that, but mostly it's about the waste disposal. That would require some monies to be held in escrow for the waste disposal. The usage has to be estimated by the growers and provided as information for the town.
Okay, but still, there's a lot of things that... there's a lot of things that has to be accomplished, that the town has to review, make sure that the farmers are following to what they agreed to. What happens if they don't? We shut them down?
Well, that is another part of what has been discussed. Perhaps it might be appropriate to discuss imagining that the bylaw passed, imagine the craft cooperative started their businesses and it wasn't successful. And imagine they went out of business because they had no more investment and they didn't get a return. So now they have some farms that have converted into the marijuana business and are no longer in business. And this has been taken up by the board also. What happens at that point?
Well, that's where a bond can help out. I'm not going to go in it. That's the bond to be able to disassemble what you sell it.
I absolutely agree with that.
I had one really good one, but I forgot it.
You can come back. When it comes back to you.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay.
And rebound Truro voter. Just a couple, going back to this concept of sticking with the big picture. And the big picture is, if we do not pass a bylaw, the industry will move forward. So we need to come up with a bylaw that strikes a balance between supporting the farmers and protecting Truro. And they don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I believe that's what the board is trying to do, is to come up with that balance. In listening to some of the conversation, it's clear that there is so much that we don't have exact information on, which is reasonable since this is a new industry in Truro. So it seems to me that we need to go back to the specifics and look at creating something that supports this industry getting started in Truro. Looking up here, I seem to remember the initial conversations were about, for example, a 5,000 square foot canopy, and now we're looking at a proposal that has the potential to be 2 1,000 square foot canopy licenses. So it seems like we should start smaller. And maybe we build in rolling growth, but it doesn't seem to make sense to start at the top tier in terms of canopy space. So I think if we can get back to a conversation of how can we support this industry getting started in a way that lets us learn as we go and put in place guidelines and requirements that do let the industry start and let us learn, and if we make a mistake, it's not a huge mistake. We can correct it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, Regan McCarthy from North Carolina. Much of what Ann said I was going to say, so I won't repeat it. I do think that it's an extraordinary opportunity for us to bring a new way of income generation into the town and to figure out how to do it in a way that really works to the benefit of all. It's important not to distort Truro's history. Truro was also a whaling community, Truro was a salt works community, Truro was a farming community for a while, and now it's a different kind of community. And we have to be realistic at the same time that we don't allow nostalgia to impede our thinking. What I'm struck by more than anything in this conversation is how much we don't know. We don't know, for example, about wastewater management. Now, wastewater management is a serious problem throughout the town, not affecting only this industry, but in fact every use of residential and commercial properties in town. We don't know about whether Peter's figures are accurate or inaccurate. We don't know what a square foot of canopy will actually look like. We don't know whether residential properties will face the potential future proliferation of other commercial demands of use in residential districts, whether this is opening a can of worms. We don't know so much, and one of the things I mean, I don't know that I can be helpful in this in a practical way, but one of the things I would really like to see these aspiring cannabis growers get the benefit of is answers to those questions before people simply say no. Because as somebody who has watched the voting in this town for years, I'm always struck that the thing that kills really interesting articles in town being voted upon is confusion. You know, the voters at all town meeting, if they're confused, are more likely to say no than yes. The most simple question that remains to be answered is, can any residential property in Toronto, providing it falls within the canopy limits that this craft cooperative proposes and wants the town to consider, can anybody grow? Is there any place in town where a residential property could not engage in cannabis growing? Is there anything other than the 1.5 acre limit that would limit the potential for any residential property owner to get involved? It's simple questions like these. If they were answered in some fact sheet or some presentation materials that could really help voters set aside obvious confusions and understand better what these proposals actually mean for life in Truro. And these guys develop, they deserve the benefit of the doubt in trying to create new business here. But they're not going to get the help they need or the response they hope for. These basic kinds of questions aren't, in my view, aren't answered more plainly in a place that people can really contemplate them. This is a good start, but between now and Old Town Meeting, I would urge somebodies to really begin to put some presentation materials out to the public that helps them to understand the answers to these basic questions. Thank you.
We're going to attempt to answer a little bit of one of those questions.
So with respect to the question of whether or not this proposal would open up all residential properties that are at least 1.5 acres in area to growth, you have to understand that anybody who's going to qualify to grow is going to have to qualify under a state license. And so if a craft cooperative is the only state licensed category that's allowed to grow in the residential district, you would have to be part of that cooperative in order to grow on your residential parcel. This proposal does not open up the residential district to marijuana cultivation as a separate use category. There is a separate use category for cultivation that's not linked to a cooperative, and that's been proposed only in the Route 6 district. So if you were proposing to go it on your own and grow as a marijuana cultivator, you could only do it in the Route 6 district.
With a special permit.
With a special permit and a license from the state.
Thank you.
Hi, Kathy Held, voter. Just a point of clarification. It's my understanding that in the state of Massachusetts, as the new laws has come through, that there's no limit statewide for the number of licenses to be given out. And some states have done that differently. Some states have said, well, we're like a liquor license, we're going to have X number of licenses permitted. In Massachusetts, there is no limit. So I think it really puts the onus on each of the towns and cities, communities to think about it very carefully, because the state's not saying anything about it. I have some concerns about sculpting the bylaw around just a single co-op, only because whatever bylaw we have is going to apply to anybody, especially if we have 2 licenses for co-ops. Another co-op will come in and we don't know who they are. A co-op from someplace else who has the ability to plant their crop in more than one location, it seems to me, might be, correct me if I'm wrong, they could come into Truro and rent a place, and they may not share the same assumed values that we have with our co-op people, who we know and we grow organic and all that kind of stuff. That was just one of the questions I had. Could we put in the bylaw that anybody would have to use organic fertilizers, for example? Can we do something like that in our bylaw? I have no idea. I also am most concerned about the wastewater. And I understand that fertilizers high in nitrogen should be used during the vegetative state of marijuana growing. And it's a concern about the runoff from those fertilizers. So, that's all.
Thank you.
Yes, Christopher Clark, Truro resident, Higgins Hollow. Just a point of clarification, it's somewhat following up on Reagan's statement about confusion, entropy of, I don't know what, ignorance, et cetera. So at the very beginning of this discussion tonight, there was mention, well, it's been mentioned multiple times, we have to have a bylaw or else, right? And so what I'm not sure of is this timeline of the or else timeline. We know that there's a date that's now been set in September for a town vote. And is that date cast in stone? I mean, are we going to be able to resolve all these issues and try and come to a real consensus here within the next 3 or 4 weeks? And if we don't, and something doesn't pass, or we have multiple bylaws presented in September, I don't understand why I've heard things seem to imply that if we don't do it soon, then all hell's going to break loose, so it's not going to work. Right?
The sky will fall.
Right. So what can someone inform me about what this timeline or
To understand the timeline, you have to understand a little bit about the nuance of Massachusetts land use law. I will endeavor to explain it in a clear fashion, but it's a little confusing. The normal practice in Massachusetts land use law is that unless you specify a particular use in your table of use regulations, it would not ordinarily be deemed an allowed use within your community. And the example I like to use is sort of extreme. There's like an asphalt manufacturing plant. If you don't have a specific line item in your table of uses that says we allow asphalt manufacturing, no one can come in and claim the right to that use because it would be deemed prohibited. That is not the case with marijuana uses. The way that the legislation or the way the ballot question was crafted and it has carried through with the legislative amendments, marijuana uses are deemed allowed unless specifically a town opts out through a specific ballot process and bylaw process. So it's a two-step process to opt out. So what happens in communities that don't put in place specific regulatory zoning that calls these uses out by their specific categories is that then you default to what the underlying zoning is in your community. You have to find a use classification that most closely fits the proposed use, which is why if you have a retail marijuana establishment and you haven't called out marijuana retail as a specific use, you would then look to the more general category of where do we allow other retail uses in the community, and then you would allow that use to go there. Same thing with agriculture or the industrial uses like processing and manufacturing. So the issue now is that the CCC is basically accepting license applications for all of these uses. And so entities that want to engage in this commercial practice within communities are looking to the communities to say, where do you allow these uses? You can't say to them, well, we haven't passed a bylaw, so we're considering it prohibited in our community. You're going to have to look to your underlying zone. So the failure to pass a zoning bylaw doesn't mean that you're prohibiting the use. It simply means that you have a broader set of areas in which these types of uses could potentially locate, and you don't have specific regulatory controls with respect to the impacts of those uses.
Okay, but can someone clarify why it seems like we have to, is this urgency, is that because
you have a craft cooperative that would like to engage in this use, and they are ostensibly allowed to do that now under state licensing, if
Is
you
there a
can't tell them that they're not
limit or
allowed.
some time limit? Do they have a license?
I believe they're in the process of applying for one.
But I'm still asking the question, what is this sort of urgency, like if we don't do it if we don't pass a bylaw or do something by September?
Then they can grow 100,000 square feet of
Why can't we
canopy
wait until
anywhere in the
November?
town.
Why can't we have more time to get the confusion factor reduced to pass and construct a bylaw that meets the demands of the town and the cooperative? What's this urgency to get it done in September versus Halloween or whatever?
Yeah.
I have to steal your mic, I'm sorry. As some of you may recall, there was an article presented at the April town meeting that proposed a moratorium. As part of that process, in preparing that article, there was much discussion between the craft cooperative and the select board, and one of the agreements that I think was part of that whole discussion was that the town would try and move a bylaw into place in the fall. So that's in keeping with that commitment that was made to try and strike that balance and build a regulatory response to this, was that a bylaw would be presented in the fall. So I think it's really part of that commitment. Whether that has to be followed or not is not, certainly not for me as a staff person to decide.
Thank you, Rebecca. So the answer is sometime in the fall, right?
Okay, sometime in the fall.
So,
Which would be
the date is what,
sometime-
September 26th or 29th? or something?
Yeah, 26, I believe.
Okay, and fall starts on the 20th or the 21st. I'm still getting at it, why do we have to push to have this done in September as opposed to, if we need more time, let's do it right, as opposed to walk into the tent and, start a fire?
I assure you, it's not that we've been rushing, we've been trying to craft this to work the best we can. It just encompasses so many different things that it's hard for us to get a clear explanation across on all of its fine points. It's not a simple little bylaw. Apparently, it's going to concern manufacturing, transportation, things that we would never have considered when we're saying, oh, a little pot farm, that's sweet, but it doesn't exactly turn out to be that. Consequently, the state will issue licenses at some point. And if we have nothing in place, we will be subjected to, as what Katie said, the existing laws and what the plan for, in other words, we can't unreasonably restrict somebody either. So we'd have to allow things to happen. We may be able to restrict it strictly to the Route 6 business district. That might be possible, but I can't assure you that's the only place.
Okay, thank you, sir. I have many other questions, but...
No, I think it's good to keep coming up with questions because...
Well, there's some things where, like, it's unclear when you say limitation to 2 licenses. Okay, so are we proposing that both licenses would be for craft cooperatives in residential areas? Is that the proposal? The counter proposal?
So, the craft cooperative is a type of state license, and it basically allows for 100,000 square feet of canopy to be grown, up to 100,000 square feet of canopy to be grown, and that can happen on multiple locations. Now, every other class of marijuana license that the state issues is location specific, and it's to one location. But because of the nature of a craft cooperative, it can encompass more than one parcel. So
Excuse me, that's
2
not my
licenses.
question. My question is, if we're going to have 2 craft cooperatives, both of them would be allowed to operate in residential areas.
That's right, but it's multiple properties, or it would be
That's a
spread
definition of
across.
status quo. Right. Because I've seen multiple kinds of iterations in this where one would be in a residential area, one wouldn't be in a residential area, or whatever it is. But this is very hard to compare this because you're not actually looking at this, the boards or whatever it's called, the co-op or whatever the group is, right? And the co-op, you're not putting these things side by side to see what actually we are comparing. So it's pretty hard to actually go through this and say, what are the details? The other thing is, some of you are all perfectly familiar with is unintended consequences. You guys have been talking about that. And there are a number of papers that have come out recently in the last several years that are very specific about unintended consequences from marijuana growing. I would recommend that people read these because it will help inform where are the cracks and the warts and the blemishes in this, and where are the places that we as a community can actually gather together and come up with some sort of compromise. Thank you.
Gian Worthington, I just have a question maybe for the craft people about this last point, the use of residents for processing manufacturing residential districts. Does that mean that each site is going to have a residence attached to it? Or does it mean that if you have a site of land that's being farmed, that you would transport the plants to a residence to process and manufacture them? Can somebody answer that question?
Michael Fee, I represent Haydn. If I understand your question correctly, the language that's up at the bottom of the slide was developed in response to the original ad hoc committee's proposal, which lumped together residential and motel uses and said that growing and cultivation could not take place in those two lumped together categories. And the reality is for the Haydn cooperative members is that most of them have residences on their farm parcels. And in some of these residences, they plan to conduct activities to extract from the flower the active ingredient in the plant. So some manufacturing type processes may take place or allowed to take place in a residence in an allowed grow site in a residential district. Does that answer your question?
It does, but what about if somebody has a parcel of land somewhere else? Can they bring the product to their home in Truro and process it there?
The site plan review process and the special permit process is going to be specific to each parcel. So the special permit issued by the Zoning Board of Appeals would only allow specially, distinctly defined activities in each of the parcels. So no, to answer your hypothetical, I don't believe that the bylaw that we're proposing would allow a grower operating in a residential district to take its product to someplace else in order to process it. That processing would have to take place in the residence on the parcel where the product is grown. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just wondering what will happen with the product that doesn't have a residence attached to it.
There's, it would have to be transported, but it would have to be transported to a site that's licensed.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maureen Burgess. Has this board determined that they will not be a special permitting board, that it will be the ZBA? Are you still considering that it could be the planning board?
I think it was going to be the ZBA. Originally, it had been as the planning
We haven't had a chance to discuss that, and I'm sure that that would be discussed when we deliberate on what we're going to put into a final version. Do you personally have a preference?
Well, I like my planning board, but I would prefer to see the planning board do it.
Okay. This is a site plan review also. I mean, it's a multi-step process for any applicant. To complete all of these steps, it's going to be pretty arduous between licensing from the state, the security, a host agreement, and actually coming up with a site plan that can be approved, and then a special permit. It might be wise to have two different boards of that.
I guess I think of the zoning board as the zoning board of appeals. I see that as an appeals board, but since you are going to be deciding this at the inception, it seems more appropriate to me that it would be the planning board.
I can appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
We still have time for a few more voices to be heard.
Hi. I have a number of points here that I'll try to run through quickly, but I wanted to just preface it by saying that what I'm hoping is that, A, you guys are able to put together a bylaw that will actually pass, because I think having this regulated will be better than having it unregulated. And also, I think that it would be great to find a way to do this so that the farmers of Truro have another option and have an opportunity to viably grow in a way that is harmonious with the non-farmers. We've seen too much of the conversion of this town into a retirement community in which it's very hard to earn a living, and I think that we owe it to the farmers to do what we can to make this workable for them, but also workable for everyone else. That said, I've seen a bunch of drafts and documents that have been floating around for the last several months, and so I've had things that I've seen in some and not in others, and so I'm going to touch on a bunch of little points. One is minimum lot size. I see 1.5 acres there. I've heard 2 acres mentioned. I don't personally have a preference between those two numbers, but I think it is important to have a minimum lot size. I've also seen discussion of the number of parcels that would be permitted for the craft co-op. That's not on that list up there. I think that I have heard the number 5, which sounds reasonable to me. On the question of the issuance of a special permit and doing site plan review, I don't know whether there would be specific criteria that would have to be taken into account during that process, but I think that they should be spelled out. I think also it would be good to require that if a grower steps up in their tier, in their license tier, from say tier 2 to tier 3, that they need to have an additional site plan review at that point.
Could you explain why you feel that?
Well, I think that it's a point at which I mean, if I understand the tiers correctly, they at least when you're jumping from one tier to from some tiers to other tiers, I believe you've got a doubling of what you can grow. I may be wrong on that, but it seems as though the intensity and potential impact of the activity changes with tier size, and so I think that there will be at least some limited re-looking at whether whether it all makes sense for a particular location. I've also heard discussion about the size of buildings, the ratio of buildings to lot size, and drawing a distinction between sort of metal structures and greenhouses. And I think from the standpoint of people who are concerned about sort of the appearance of these locations, I think to the extent that you can encourage structures that look like what non-farmers think of as farming structures, like greenhouses and barns and so on, I think that would make people happier. I'm concerned about light pollution, because not from indoor growing, but from nighttime security. I don't exactly know how you achieve acceptable security without security lights at night, but security lights at night are a pretty negative thing for everyone who abuts them. You're going to respond to that?
I heard that the use of infrared lighting, which you would not actually see, would be acceptable. Am I incorrect with that, or am I right?
Correct.
I can't promise that it will all be that. It also might be motion detector lighting, which would not always be on. That's a possibility also. And downward shaded lighting would still be required, but it would have to be higher up, obviously. So.
Okay, well, I don't know what, I mean, to the extent that you can include some protections for neighbors from light pollution at night, I urge you to do so. I'm personally not too terrified about the idea of fences. They are absolutely a part of agriculture, and I think that there are ways to make fences appear acceptable with growing vegetation on the other side of them, and I think that requirements for screening would be good to include. I don't know what to do about odor control. I don't know how significant a problem it would be, and I don't know what the options are for whether there's an affordable way of doing odor control. But that's certainly something that could be a significant detriment to neighbors. And so to the extent that you can put something in that will really address that, I think you should. I have a couple of things here that are too minor to bother with, I guess. The last two things I'll say is, one, I've seen mention of trying to harmonize new buildings, both in terms of their architectural style and their scale with the community, and that's something that I think is good to include. And then I had another note here, just jumping back to the question of special permits. Would they be transferable to, like, if someone were to sell their lot? Because I think that it would be good to have them non-transferable. And also, I think that it would be good to have a trigger clause of some sort where if someone's license expires or is not renewed, that they then lose their special permit. And that's all I've got.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We already had something about the transfer that I think it was not transferable.
Non-transferable. CCC makes it non-transferable.
The CCC already makes it non-transferable.
The license goes with the applicant, not the parcel.
Property.
Or
And the
property.
special permit?
Not transferable.
Not transferable. So that would be number 4 in the, so there is something already about that. It would be restricted to the original applicant. CCC already addressed the something. Very good to be seen. Hello.
Hi, my name is Peter Shatterman. I live at 12 Walnut Road. I'm a member of the Ideal Craft Cooperative, and I have a farm there. I'd like to just mention a few things. And I see here tonight, I think half the population of Walnut Road is here. Maybe I have that a little off, but a lot of people. So the first thing that I want to say is I'm in that category you talked about, Steve, of feeling that I have a farm and I'm surrounded by residences. The farm that we own goes back to the 1750s. It was originally established by the Payne family, the founders of Truro. And the farm was anywhere between 80 and 100 acres. And my father-in-law purchased it in 1941. And he purchased it from Daniel Payne, which means that our family is only the second owner of that farm. So there's a lot of rich history there. When my father-in-law purchased it, he had the option to buy all 100, all 80 acres. And he was a school teacher, and he couldn't see the wisdom in that, having all that land down here in Truro. He didn't know what he'd do with it. So he kept 30 acres. The other 70 acres became Sylvan Lane, they became Morris Avenue, they became Longnook Lane, and they went way down Longnook Road. So this farm was over time developed into residences. And what's left is the legacy of that farm, which we now own. Now, my father-in-law sold off pieces of it to put his kids through school, and the National Park Service took a big chunk. So today, we have 10 acres, which is extremely unusual in Truro, and we realize that we're truly blessed to have that. It gives us enormous privacy. In terms of what we might do on that property related to cannabis, the current areas that people see that we're growing in would not be used. I have a large piece of property at the top of our hill, which is extremely wooded. You can't even see neighbors from up there. And this would be the area that I would designate as a potential growing area for our business if we got into it. So we're in a unique situation where it would be completely wooded all the way around and a long distance from people's properties. Now, as far as Andy Smith is concerned, Andy, I think our properties might be a little bit more than what you said. I just measured it tonight, Peter.
And what'd you get?
600 feet.
Okay. Well, where I would be...
Where you sell it tomatoes.
What's that?
From our property line to where you're selling your tomatoes.
Okay, well, if you take a straight line from where my growing area is down to your place, I think it's well over 1,000, but we can try that.
Well, I'm just worried about the smell, Peter.
Yeah, okay. I frankly don't know really what a large growing area of cannabis smells like. I've never smelled it. But related to the
some very bad reports in California.
Yeah, we've heard those. Down the road from me, one of my neighbors has a plant growing which is Japanese knotweed. And Japanese knotweed is an invasive species here. The bees love it, so I'm glad for my bees. But when it blooms, it smells like rancid cigars. I mean, it is really a horrible smelling thing. Now, I would like to go to his property and spray it with Roundup and get rid of it because I don't like the smell. So, we also have, as you know, a lot of wild roses growing on Walnut Road. I am violently allergic to those. I go into fits when those things come in. Now, do I have a right to eliminate those? I think the smell thing is sort of in the eyes of the beholder. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But that's just a point. So the other thing I wanted to mention, there's two more things. One was David's suggestion of bonding. I don't know if when Montanos got established, they had to put up a bond to operate.
Would that have been the case? I don't think so. And how about when the Salty Dog got into business? Did they have to put up a bond operating? And what about the vineyard?
No.
So I don't know why people feel there should be a bond placed on people who want to get into this business. It's just, from a business perspective, it just doesn't seem fair or logical. Now, under the, if I, maybe Michael, you could straighten me out on this, or our legal counsel, under the Cannabis Control Commission, I think there's a provision in there that says if the business collapses, you have to have put aside funding to be able to remove all of what you put in place. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's not removal of all infrastructure, it has to do with the destruction of any plants that would be remaining after a business closes.
Okay. So there is some provision there to deal with that kind of a collapse situation. The other thing I want to mention is right now, under the state law, each adult in a household, the primary adults like men and wife, you're each allowed to grow 6 plants. So a total of 12. That's state law, right? Currently, I have growing 11 plants in my greenhouse. Now, the one that got ripped out was a male. And in my household, I can't even have a male dog. We have all girls. Anyway, we took the male plant out, and I now have 11. And I've been calculating my water usage. In my greenhouse, I grow primarily tomatoes. And tomatoes, I can assure you, consume a lot more water than these cannabis plants. And in the calculation I've done, under my circumstances, with the type of strands that are being grown there, which are both the sativa and the indica, I'm consuming about 0.87 gallons per plant per day. So it's very, very different, Peter, than what you had suggested. So it's just a case study, of one, but I think it's an interesting fact. So that's all I have to say.
Are those plants in growing bags?
No, these are in the ground. The typical greenhouse in the ground growing situation, or what could be a model for growing outdoors.
Mr. Chairman,
I
mentioned the higher numbers I have are for intensive industrial-like production of marijuana in greenhouses, the way the industry does everywhere.
Yeah, but I don't think there's anybody in our group that's planning on doing that at this point in time. The other thing I'd like to say about this 100,000 square foot canopy is that the state law says that a cooperative can grow a maximum of 100,000 square feet. Doesn't mean they're going to do it day one. That potential is there.
Understood. I understand that, but I think that using the number just instills a fear factor. Right?
It does.
And I wouldn't imagine that you reach 100,000 square feet of canopy in the first year. I wouldn't think it would be even half that.
I would think you get it anywhere near it.
But I understand your concerns. I thank you for bringing out the fact that you have a farm that has been in existence for a very long time. And, I thank you for coming back.
Now, Steve, just one other thing. You and I engaged in a little bit of a side conversation the other night. And in my view, I think a lot of the issue here resolves around the fact that you're trying to set up a set of rules for farmers who happen to have growing areas in residential areas. And you're trying to use the residential requirements to guide and control them. I think if there was a different approach to this, it might work out much more effectively.
What approach would that be?
My recommendation to the board would be to set up a new property classification, which is called historic farms or whatever. Well, that applies to farms. You have a set of rules for farms.
what they can and cannot do. And then in the residences, if you're going to grow in a residence, you got a rule for that. But we're trying to fit the requirement into a shoebox that doesn't really work very well. Now, maybe I have that prejudice because I have a farm with a lot of property. And anyway.
I appreciate that thought. I mean, that's something we can take into account. I don't want to change somebody's classification if they are a farm by the state rules and cause them any problems for their tax exclusions that they have already. So that's anything we should go for. We didn't really actually go through these. And you know what? I don't have actual fact. I only have one person who I heard that they grew marijuana. A gentleman alluded to the fact that there was nuisance complaints about the smell from California residents. Is that right?
Yes.
And that's something that you read?
Yes. I also read that Vermont is about to pass or has passed a law to regulate odor because of it in Vermont. There's a great deal more. I mean, it's just not a minor thing. You go on the web and you get...
Yeah, you can't keep talking that long because no one will hear you on the TV. I appreciate the answer, which is yes. Please come to the microphone.
I just have one question. I'm Jane Clark, and
that's better from the microphone.
I'm Jane Clark. I'm a Truro resident. What are your next steps? So we all leave here, and I'm wondering what happens.
You want to know the next step?
I do.
Okay. The next step would be close the public hearing. And then the board would deliberate with all the information we have gathered to write this bylaw best we can in the time allotted to us at our next meeting. Taking into account, we were going to discuss having that next meeting, which will be a special meeting, where we will deliberate all of the ideas and facts and information to try to scribe the bylaw that will work, that people could support. I am as concerned as anyone with the smell. Some people might consider it more noxious than other people, I don't know. I'm not aware of what the smell would be like. So
will the whole planning board be involved in this, or will it be a small group?
This will be a planning board meeting.
Planning board meeting, okay. Okay, great. Thanks.
And then we would recommend it to the selectmen. They would vote on it.
Okay, they vote on it, and then when would we be able to see it?
So after we discuss it, I think it will probably be available, provided we get some legal opinion on it. Make sure that we've crossed every I.
Okay. So would you accept written comments as opposed to someone who wasn't here? They could contribute to your deliberations?
Certainly.
Okay.
If I close the public hearing, then no. But if I have something tonight in writing, I consider it that I'm...
If you don't get it by tonight, it's not...
Oh, okay, because we're not going to continue the public hearing. The board will close the public hearing tonight. That's the intent of the board.
So that's the closure of all input?
Yes. That would be the closure of the input to the board. So if you have something to say, it's still open. And I'm totally willing to hear as much as I can hear tonight.
And that's a typical procedure, where under something like this that's so critical, you would not accept written opinions or...
It's not that I would want to, but that's the method. I think Katie would speak on it.
The
point of the public hearing is to accept the public input. Once a public hearing has been closed, the board doesn't have the ability to take further public comment. They do have the ability to deliberate as a board and to make their decision and their recommendation with respect to the bylaw.
Why would you say that the board doesn't have the ability to take further comment?
The ability of the board to take comment is part of a public hearing process. Once the public hearing is closed, they cannot take further comment because that part of the process is concluded.
Oh, this is part of like an open meeting law or something like that? So you really cannot take anything written after 2 hours?
Once the board votes to close the public hearing, the public comment period has concluded. The board could certainly vote to continue the public hearing to the next meeting, accept written comments between now and then close the public hearing at the beginning of their next meeting after all comments have been received, and then do their deliberations at that point. That would be an alternative if there's further comments that want to be submitted in writing.
Does that make you feel better if we do that? I'm serious, I'm not joking. I understand that you may have something that you want us to hear. This was the night for that. If there's more information, I'm considering what you're saying.
Right. No, I'm familiar with public hearings, but not like this. So it would just be, I would appreciate it if I could actually submit questions or concerns to the board. I wouldn't do it in 2 weeks.
There were things, well, I know that there is a time constraint on my back. I mean, I certainly can let the board continue without me if that's the case. We were hoping to meet on Tuesday. And if we continue this public hearing to that date certain, that would be the point at which we would close that. That would only provide another 7 days.
So I'll give you a reason why.
Yeah.
So the ad hoc committee presented a bunch of things, items, and we read them all off. And then we see this. But in order to actually compare this, and I presume that's not complete, how do I understand what areas of agreement and disagreement are, and where the areas would be for compromise?
So they're fairly close. There are a couple of discrepancies in numbers.
But I cannot distill that from what I've seen tonight.
I appreciate that.
Good, so you'll let me submit something before Tuesday next week?
I'm taking that into consideration.
Okay,
We'll talk that over. Anything else? Do you want to write something for us, Dave? Go ahead. Come on up.
I don't write if I can speak. I don't write if I can speak.
Fine,
Turn
speak.
Is it on now?
No. Oh, it's a little bit.
Hold it.
Hold the button.
Low tech.
I started this morning. Good afternoon. Skipper Long Neck Road resident and a voter. And I said hello to all my neighbors, farmers. I think it's great that the board is trying to move forward and to help everybody in this town keep everybody's concerns when making a decision as to what the final bylaws are going to look like. Except one question more than concern. The movable containers. I don't know what size they would be. I've seen shipping containers of.
Imagine the tractor trailer size.
Yeah, you're obviously not a tractor. Then if it was a possible alternative for the farmers if they feel they need them to maybe have them in an industrial area so it's not in a residential area. Now, it might be cost prohibitive, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe they have an answer to that. But it just seems to me that they're going to use those for a separate process after growing marijuana. Maybe be done in an industrial area. I don't know if that's just not too onerous for them to have to move a raw product into those cargo containers. But which is pretty ugly. So just a concern I have. Maybe you have an answer, but I don't know.
Okay, I appreciate that. I mean, there are some shipping containers around in Truro that seem to sit there for quite a while on people's properties, and I agree they're not.
I'm aware of that. I'm not very sure.
Okay, thank you. Best laid plans of mice and men. Mike, do you wish to continue this public hearing and hear more testimony? Do you think we should continue this public hearing? You could just give me an opinion.
I don't know if anybody has anything to say.
Might be fun. Jack, do you feel like we need to hear more information?
Is that in person or written?
I think it could be either at the beginning of the next meeting.
I would support receiving written commentary.
Thank you. Bruce?
I think we fulfilled our obligation.
Thank you. And Peter?
I agree with Bruce.
Carol?
I don't object to holding the open to the opening of our meeting on Tuesday so that people who want to file written comments, maybe didn't want to speak out, could give us their input. So that would not concern me, but just so everybody knows we would close the meeting 5 minutes after it opens.
Fair enough.
Leave it open.
So I heard that this was a gavel close. It wasn't actually a vote, is it?
We need a motion to continue.
So then I would want to have a motion from someone then.
Motion to continue?
To the date certain? We haven't agreed on a date certain, have we? Yes, we have.
For next meeting?
How about this? Tuesday, let me see what date that is.
Tuesday the 28th.
Sorry, it can't be that. It has to be Tuesday. Is that all right with you? Sure. Sorry about that. That would be Tuesday, the 28th of August.
At noon.
At noon.
In Town Hall.
In Town Hall. Can you be there, Peter?
Yes.
Carol?
Aaron?
Karen,
Yes.
sorry. Okay, my eyes are crossed now, sorry.
I'll bring
Yes,
Carol.
she's only been on the board for 2 years.
You all right with everything?
Yes.
Okay, the motion, anyone second it?
I did.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, this will be closing pretty soon after we open the meeting on Tuesday, so that we'll be able to see written, but not another public
The
hearing.
purpose is to deliberate, come up with the final version that we consider the compromise that allows the town to have bylaws to regulate the propagation of cannabis in the town and all of the other uses that we've had to deal with.
So I
Say what?
Continue it.
The motion says to continue. If you want to continue to accept written comment,
Yes.
then that's what the motion
And
has
then,
to
and
say.
that's what this motion is, I agree. I think Peter's question was about after that.
No, he was questioning the motion on the floor. The motion on the floor is not to open, accept written comment, and then close. The motion is to continue the public hearing.
That's correct.
There is a difference.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
That's right. So the public hearing will be continued. All those in favor of continuing? You have something to say before we do this?
No, it can come after.
Maybe it can.
No?
Oh.
Where can people submit comment?
To the town planner?
Thanks. Do you want an email? I can give you the email. The town planner. I'll just say that loud. It's CHAR churro-ma.gov. CHARPER@churro-ma.gov.
I love when these meetings get very personal. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of continuing? Aye. Okay, that means this meeting will be continued to Tuesday at noon at Town Hall. Anything left on our agenda? Yes, there is something left. Board reports. Thank you everyone for coming.